In this section, we cover implementing apps and also remote management as components that you can actually configure in Windows 10. Now, without the applications running on the device on Windows 10, it makes it really difficult to really actually get anything done. So, needless to say, applications are fairly important when it comes to Windows 10 because that's what the users are actually accessing. So in this section, we're going to cover the desktop apps, startup options, anything that has to do with Windows Store for Business, and just creating packages and provisioning packages as well. And we'll also talk about just using the assessment and deployment kit to create those packages. So these are all pieces that are part of implementing what we consider applications running on the device itself. Now, if I were to sit here and talk to you about binaries, MSIs, and executables, it would make it a very uncomfortable conversation because, an MSI or executable is something that you should expect to see on a Windows device as we know it. Now, we're moving into the world of Windows stores and Windows Store for Business. So we want to spend a little bit of time and talk to you about why that's important. So Windows Store is essentially a way of managing access to universal Windows applications that are hosted in the Windows Store.
Yep, you'll see the term UWP, the Universal Windows Platform, right, or Universal Windows Applications. A lot of us remember them as modern apps back when Windows 8 when they first came out, but they are Universal Windows applications. And you can see we have on the screen, integrate the user's Microsoft account into the organization. So we can do that so that you have the Windows Store for Business that can actually use your O365 or your Azure AD account now in today's Windows Store for Business. So again, as things are moving quickly, things are changing, and one of those things is you can use Azure AD in the Windows Store for Business now.
So we've mentioned a few ways you can actually deal with managing Windows Store, Windows applications. We talked about using Intune, Microsoft Intune, to deliver an application to a device, whether it be a mobile application, whether it be a Universal Windows app or an MSI, you can actually deliver it with Microsoft Intune down to a device. You can use SCCM or System Center Configuration Manager to deliver an application to a device. Or even you can use other tools like software group policy to actually deliver application and group policy preferences to push an application down. So a number of methods that you could actually leverage to actually deliver an application down to a device. And those are things that we want you to be sort of cognizant of as you're going into this exam.
And don't forget to mention side-loading applications. Side-loading an application means I'm getting it from the Windows Store, but I'm not publishing it from the Windows Store. I'm installing it, but I'm not actually publishing it from the store. I'm side-loading it onto the image itself.
Now, Windows Store for Business takes on a different approach because it adds a layer of convenience to the organization. Now, what that means as an IT administrator is if I have specific applications that I would like to make available for my end users, I can actually take that application, upload it into the Windows Store, and make it available so that the Windows Store for my employee can actually see that application in the Windows Store as an additional application that they can actually install.
Right, and they have your own custom logoed store window that they access, and they can see those applications that you have published and made available to them. Another example of when we use Store for Business, and I have a customer that's actually doing this right now, is they have a grouping of users that need to use a DVD player. And the DVD player is $14.99 off the Windows Store as of today, and it's licensed. And $14.99 gives you a single license. So what the customer did was they bought a block of licenses from the store, and they gave access to specific users. So when those users launch the Windows Store from their Windows 10 desktops, they see this DVD player is available. They don't have to put their own credit card in to get the $14.99. The company's already done that. If I were to log in as one of those, as a different user, I would launch my Windows Store for Business and not have access to that because that DVD player has only been made available to certain users in the Store for Business. So it allows you to acquire blocks of licenses to be distributed, so those applications can be distributed to certain users.
Exactly. So, and then remember, there are two different roles. You can have a user or an IT professional. Those are two different roles that you have right now, and also just different scenarios and by which you'd actually use the Windows Store for Business. One example would be offline distribution, where you're basically allowing access to that application even though it's offline, and then online distribution, make it available so when the user's connected to the network. Now, so Windows Store for Business is really just a much more innovative way of managing access to applications in one location. And they're working on ways to make it much more efficient so they can provide any application through that platform. You can still use SCCM, you can still use System Center Configuration Manager. It also has its own mechanism for allowing users to request access to an application. You can still use GPOs, where you can publish or assign an application to a user and have that application deployed to the system. And you can also use just the plain old batch script or actual installation of an application itself. The other place you'll be able to see this in is you can actually configure Windows Store apps. Now, this is again another setting on your device itself and allows you to basically do things like block the application, sideload the application, distribute them through the Windows Store, or even download the application. This just shows you a few of those options where you can actually see things like the size of that Windows application, what's installed in your machine, and then many other features that are available on that platform.
Yeah, if you look at my machine, I'm going to go to my Windows Store, and what's interesting is because I'm on a non-domain joined device, I'm on an Azure AD device, so I'm connected to my company's Azure AD. I have my own account here, and I have my work account here already linked. And so you can see I have my personal store. If I want to use my personal store to download anything, again, this is stuff that is mine. I would use my own credit card to download, or the stuff that my company has given me. And I can see my company's tab, and they are allowing me to get Translator or Bugger, which is a troubleshooting tool, or again, WinDebug or Microsoft Teams. So these are ones that Microsoft has made available to me that may be licensed, and they may even cost something, but they don't cost anything for me because it's part of the corporate store.
So as you can see there, it makes it easy really to just decide on what applications I want to install and from where they're coming from.
Yep.
As your organization matures, you can turn on Windows Store for Business and really deliver the core applications that you need for your business to be productive. The other side of this is you can actually see things like the size of space that's being used, where you want the application to be saved on your device, as well as anything related to just where you want to store offline content on your device as well. So here are a number of different ways where you can actually have files that are music placed in the music location, photos, etc. So these save locations are controllable as part of your Windows Store app configuration as well.
You can actually see, if you look at my screen, I just went to my settings and I typed in storage, and you can see everything that Alfred's talking about, where I have storage, my default save locations, right? So I have all this information available to me. Again, I'll just type storage. Manage my storage space, everything that we're talking about in this video series that we can manage right from here in the Settings app.
The next piece of this that we want to cover is just using a PowerShell to basically do things like sideload store applications. So a sideloaded store application may be something that in your organization, your developer builds as a company-based application, and it becomes an AppX file. So they're using Visual Studio to build it, and at some point you want to make sure that application is available to be installed on the system. So these commands itself really just allow you to, what we call sideload it, into your operating system. So add AppX provision package, online folder path, you give it the path of the location of the file, and you can actually do the installation.
And the important thing there is, it is an AppX file that's being sideloaded. You're not sideloading MSIs and XEs and VBS types of applications. You're sideloading AppX files.
An AppX file is very similar to a packaged version of a universal Windows app. Right? And once it's installed, if you go to the Start window, you'll be able to find it and use it just like you do with one of those universal Windows apps. So we've given a couple other commands, how you could actually get the things, the package itself, the manifest itself. These are all ways of sideloading store applications that also can be uploaded to the Windows Store as well. The Windows Assessment and Deployment Kit, again, is the component that we can actually use to distribute the applications to the end users, and it's another tool that we use for deployment. And it also comes with different deployment tools like the Windows PE, the Image Configuration Designer, and the latest version is Windows ADK for Windows 10.
Now it's interesting that we bring this up here as a way to install applications as part of the imaging, but also we mentioned the ADK earlier in another series when we talk about preparing for Windows, installing Windows. We use the same ADK because, again, you can see the user state migration tools are there, and deployment tools and WinPE boot images and things like that are all available. But you can also use ADK for your application installations. during the deployments.
We also mentioned earlier the MDT is another tool to deploy applications as well. It does the same, it does a better job of deploying OSs, but it also can be used to deploy applications.
Interesting about MDT 2013 Update 2 is it's called MDT or Microsoft Deployment Toolkit 2013. To my knowledge, they are never going to 2016, 2018, 2020. They're always going to call it MDT 2013 and maybe change the update revs as needed. Just like Windows 10 is not becoming Windows 11, Windows 12, Windows 15, it's always Windows 10, MDT will stay at 2013, interestingly enough.
And we mentioned the Windows Configuration Designer. Again, another tool that you can actually use to provision packages. The packages are then installed on the machine, and you'll be able to run it based on the settings. Now, we covered this in earlier modules, but it's important that you guys know that this is an option. And then remote management. Now, remote management, again, goes back to how do I access the operating system or the machine that I'm running from a remote system. So we've covered, in this section, we cover basically some of the tools that you can actually use, from remote desktop to remote PowerShell, or even just using the MMC itself to kind of open up the console, the actual image and actually do work on the actual system itself. So different ways to access a Windows 10. The one we want to just mention, specifically is the Remote Desktop Connection Manager, for accessing systems remotely. We typically see this both in Azure as well as on-premise systems. As long as you know the IP address or the machine is, is routable on the network, we can actually get to it.
What's interesting here is that we've been looking at this remote desktop connection to remote into our servers. We've been looking at this for 15 years, relatively unchanged. But how many of us have actually clicked the different tabs at the top of the box? Most of us only look at that general tab. We don't look at the rest of the remote desktop connection box. So we're going to show you the rest of that box. So of course the general tab allows you to put in the name of the machine you're connecting to if you want to save those settings. And then we have the display if you want to change your display
quality, the
DPIs,
the connection bar, whether you want to use multiple monitors for the remote session, you can choose those options. And the third one you get is local resources. Do I want to connect my remote audio settings so that I can actually hear it on that remote system that I'm accessing?
One of the nice things there is printers, right? I'm at home and I VPN to my company, I remote into something and I want to print. I don't want it printing at work because I'm not at work. I want it printing at home. So I want to make sure that my printers follow through to that remote desktop connection.
And you can see that More button, because that really gives you options that if you have other drive letters that you want to share, you can actually go in and share those drive letters remotely on that remote desktop setting. This allows you to copy files from one system to another. Now again, with the RDP, the 7, the latest client, you can actually just copy paste from your physical machine to the virtual or remote system without any problem, because it does its own transfer of information automatically. And the other tab we look at is just to detect the experience itself. How strong of a connection am I making from this device to that remote system?
If I have an old dial-up connection, which I used to like to joke about, maybe I don't want a full performance to happen because it'll just take too long for all my mouse clicks.
And lastly, we have the advanced option where you can actually tell it to warn you or different settings around server authentication, whether it needs to give you additional information and prompt for access. That setting can be controlled here, and the option to connect from anywhere, which is basically configuring your settings to connect through some sort of remote desktop gateway, whatever that setting is on your remote desktop gateway.
For this exam, I would absolutely recommend opening up an MSTSC and going through all those different boxes, options, and actually looking at them, upgrading your RDP client if you have an older version of the client to get the best benefit, the security, even a better display resolution in the latest version of the RDP client than in previous versions.
And we have a practice question for you that we're going to go through with you right now. And if you are the administrator for Contoso.com, a user named Jane attempts to access a resource on a server 1 named Legal Docs, but is denied access. She then uses Remote Desktop to connect to server 1, opens File Explorer, and is able to access Legal Docs. You need to make sure when Jane attempts to access Legal Docs, she is denied access. All other users should not be affected by any changes you make. You connect to server 1 through Computer Management, expand Share Folders, click Legal Docs, and then click Properties. What should you do next?
So This is something we talked about earlier when we looked at our shared folder permissions. Shared permissions only take effect over the network, right? So A, on the Share Permission tab, add Jane's account and select Deny Read. B, on the Security tab, add Jane's account and select Deny Read. C, on the General tab, change the user limit to 0. And D, on the General tab, change the share name to LegalDocs $. Let's break down C and D first. So C, if you set the user limit to 0, Jane will absolutely be denied access on the to the folder, but so will everybody else. So that can't be right. On the General tab, change the share name to LegalDocs $. That will actually unshare it, so everyone else will be affected and reshare it as a hidden share. That's the $sign at the end. So we know that it's A or B. A, on the Share Permission tab, add Jane's account and select Deny Read. She's already been denied read. She went to whack LegalDocs or Server1 LegalDocs and was denied access. So she's already been denied read, either probably through a group that she's a member of. On the Security tab, add Jane's account and select Deny Read. So we know that B has to be the right answer, and we said that if you RDP into a server and then go and browse for the folder and have access to it when you shouldn't, it's because of the Security tab, not because of the Share tab.
Exactly. So thanks for going through that with us, Joe. It's very important to make sure that you know how to think about exam taking and how to eliminate the wrong answer so you can actually get to the right answer.
It's actually pretty funny because on this exam, when I sat to take this exam, I was surprised that, I know all these permissions, and I know I'm a member of multiple groups, and I have these permissions, and least restrictive, most restrictive. But you don't think about that until you're actually sitting in front of the exam, reading the question, and using your grease pencil and notepad to do the math to see what your permissions actually are.
It does take a lot of logical thinking and planning. So again, if you're not familiar with any of these terms that we mentioned, we are really challenging to kind of step back, go back and do the homework on the section that we talked about that doesn't make sense or that you may have difficulty understanding, so that when you're in the exam room, you can still sort of comfortably walk through the process and find the answer you're looking for.
Exactly.
A few tips to remember as we're closing out this section module is refresh yourself on how to use subnets, supernets, and just common IPv6 addresses.
And that was important too, because I remember back in the Windows 2000 days, we actually had an IP exam, which was all subnetting. And then the exam questions throughout the rest of 2003, 2008, 2012 had a couple of subnetting questions, and this has subnetting questions as well. We're going to give you a CIDR notation and make sure you understand what CIDR, CIDR means and how many IP addresses you have within that subnet.
The other thing to remember is just remember things like NetSH, PowerCFG, all these, ancient command prompt lines are still there. They still work. I wouldn't call them ancient, but they still are.
But I did.
They are
I wouldn't call them ancient, but I did call them ancient.
Ancient meaning that PowerShell is kind of taken over.
Right. They're old school.
Yeah, and they still work. They both still work, so they're still relevant. So if you see a question on there, sort of determine if there's another way to do it through PowerShell. And then lastly, just folder permissions, as Joe mentioned earlier. Make sure you know how allowing or denying access based on folder permissions, whether you need to share or unshare access using some sort of NTFS permissions. So with that, we wanted to make sure that we covered just some of those components. Primarily, this section, we talked about just Windows Store for Business, as well as accessing resources on the network. Again, thanks for joining us, and we hopefully this was helpful for you in preparing for the exam.